Good day, all. This is Tim Lee with the Boeing Company. Daryl Taylor and I are here today to talk about our 9104-1 version 2022 standard for the requirements for certification of aviation, space, and defense quality management systems. Specifically, we're here to talk about the changes the new standard provides to improve our process, as well as Daryl's going to give us a comprehensive demonstration on the organization certification analysis process, including a demonstration of our new tool. So let's let Daryl say hi to the audience. Daryl, you want to introduce yourself?
Good day. My name is Daryl Taylor. I am retired from Raytheon Technologies with over 10 years of experience with the industry. I was very active on the 9104/1 writing team and the author for the OCAP tool. And I will be showing you the new tool, which has been revised to make it a little bit more user-friendly.
Well, thank you, Daryl. And just a little bit of background myself. I'm Tim Lee. I'm an associate technical fellow for the Boeing Company. I'm also the chair of the Americas Aerospace Quality Group Certification Oversight Team and the voting member from the Americas on the oversight team, as well as the international document rep for the 9104-1 standard. As the saying goes, this has been a long journey getting to this point where we're now in the implementation phase of the 9104-1 standard. But with everything, there's rationale as to why we need to make this change. And specifically, it was to align with the ISO IEC 17021-1 requirements, the ISO 17011 2017 criteria, as well as the International Accreditation Forum mandatory documents. Since our last revision to the 9104-1 standard, there's been considerable improvements in the baseline ISO documentation and requirements. We wanted to take advantage of that and continue to use this as our baseline and supplement these requirements with aviation, space, and defense industry unique, industry-controlled other party scheme requirements. Our motto all along has been using that strong baseline of ISO requirements along with the IF mandatory documents and our aerospace supplementation to develop and launch a robust, conforming, and valued certification process, ensuring that we have competent auditors at the appropriate client location with sufficient time to do a value-added audit and reporting as such. The scope of the revision, it was a major revision, basically a complete rewrite of the existing standard. The standard now contains requirements that are complementary in addition to the laundry list of ISO IEC standards I mentioned before. We did not repeat these requirements within the new version of the standard. They're supplemented, so comprehensively you will need to build yourself a library of these documents to utilize when trying to understand the industry-controlled other party requirements. Again, these requirements of these standards are not restated in the 9104-1. We also believe this is a significant step up in the drive to reduce QMS nonconformance and oversight with built-in audit reductions for consistently high-performing and conforming organizations. So we want to reward our stakeholders that step up, develop mature, robust, and compliant quality management systems, but at the same time have a robust process in place to audit those organizations that need a little more extra time as well. It does include modified requirements for the International Aerospace Quality Group committees for oversight and management of our certification scheme, including introduction of a new structure called regional management structures. This was formerly known as Certification Body Management Committees, or CBMCs, but now as we expand the IAQG process into different countries, different regions, we found the need to create regional management structures that support the sectors. There's also changes as it relates to the number of accreditation body witness audits and file reviews that are required. And there are significant changes under the audit duration requirements. Again, you'll find today that we have replaced the audit calculator with a risk-based organization certification analysis process with data driven from client information. So basically, we're utilizing that information that should be generated by the QMS to assess and develop a comprehensive audit plan with that sufficient audit time. There's allowances for site-specific audit duration based on risk and activity. And as Daryl already mentioned, we do have a functional organization certification analysis process tool, and it's available for use. The reward at the end for those that step up, we also have a new performance-based surveillance and recertification process, identified as PBSRP, for those organizations that have highly effective and highly performing quality management systems. In order to protect the IAQG scheme, participants must report observed conduct that could adversely affect the integrity of the certification scheme. As you know, there are those out there that speed excessively, that often bend the rules. However, in our scheme, we have no room for that type of behavior or conduct. So we're asking everyone up front. We clearly stated that we expect everyone to act ethically. And at the end of the day, if you see something, you must say something. We can't avoid this type of activity, and we need to take the appropriate action when we do see any type of this behavior. In addition, we made a significant change to the site structure criteria. We've removed and eliminated the campus structures, several site as well as complex. And then we're going to simply align ourselves with the IAF criteria defined in IAF MD5 as well as MD1, and move to single and multi-site structures only. Significant change. Now you may ask yourself, because this could have an impact on some of your clients, why isn't campus retained? If you recall, campus was structured around a single value stream with multiple locations. It wasn't retained because in the 2012 version of the -1, the concept of campus was introduced, and at the present time, there wasn't any type of requirements in place that would negate our use of campus. However, since publication of the -1, the IAF changed the requirements in the mandatory document 1, and basically the method of calculation of audit duration used in campus certification structure is no longer permitted. You can't summarize the number of employees across all sites. In addition, they put caps on the allowable reductions in audit duration, which drove us to also address that as well. IFMD1 now requires a calculation of audit duration separately for each site. And as the IAQG scheme is based on the requirements for accredited third party, it was not possible to retain the campus approach. However, again, recognizing that there could be opportunities to have a high performing quality management system, so we implemented the new PBSRP as an alternative process, and will reward those organizations with reduced audit duration should they have the appropriate criteria in place. And we'll talk about that later during the webinar. Just some more key changes. Audit duration. Again, there's flexibility to determine the amount of calculated audit duration to be used at each site. Although you can reduce the audit duration up to 50% max for a site, you still must ensure that all audit duration is utilized during the audit at those sites that may need a little extra time. We increased the allowance for use of remote auditing. So now there's a 50% allowance. So if you have administrative processes that you want to audit in advance of the on-site activity, that's permitted, provided that you don't use any more than 50% of the audit duration. Again, the audit duration is based on the results of the OCAP process. It needs to be justified and supported with clear documented information. A lot of feedback from the auditors about audit report writing and ensuring that we have criteria in place for that. Off-site time for report writing may be used during performance of the on-site audit. That was key. If you choose to take part of your day at the end of the day and report the results on site, you're allowed to do that. However, it's considered report writing time and not audit duration time. There's no issue with doing that as part of the on-site activity. Auditor rotation, we tried to simplify this requirement. It's required after a minimum of 6 consecutive audits. unless justified as submitted and approved by the AB. We have certain areas of the world that are in development that could have a shortage of auditors. So we wanted to ensure that we continue to develop those areas with the allowance that if there is a justified acceptance in this, it could be approved by the AB. Again, it's a simple counting. If you've been involved in an audit 6 consecutive times at one of your clients, you need to take a break. The certification program itself, the organization context, certification structure, and audit time calculation have all been revised in this new organization certification analysis process. We believe this comprehensive process is aligned with the current ISO and IAF mandatory baselines. Non-applicable processes result in audit duration from the established minimum baseline. So if you have processes that are not applicable, such as design, for example, you will be allowed to reduce the audit duration based on that non-applicability. Again, OCAP will be used to drive the audit duration baseline and includes increases, allowances, and allowances for decreases and movement audit duration between sites with the 50% limitation. A lot of words, a lot of things to consider, but one of the things that I think we did a good job on in this standard is you'll find throughout the standard we've peppered it with graphics, illustrations, examples, and formulas to clearly indicate, as the graphic at the bottom of this file indicates, is to help you calculate audit duration using the OCAP process. A lot of good graphics in the new standard. So what is the OCAP process and how do we break that down? Recognize there's 4 key elements of the process. It begins with understanding the organization context. Is the appropriate aerospace quality management system standard apply? Are the core processes identified? And we also have a new IAQG standards matrix where we're looking at use of our standards and application as such. From that step, you move right into development of the certification audit program, where you're looking at the sites across the structure. Are there virtual sites? What are the QMS processes? So developing a comprehensive certification audit program up front is key to having a robust process. Then comes the risk analysis. This is the dialogue and the back and forth arrows between the audit program and the risk analysis is there for a reason. And that is your clients, the certified organization, must provide data to their certification body on organizational performance, complexity, the maturity of their self-assessment or internal audit program, whether or not they're meeting customer satisfaction metrics, and at the end of the day, how do they rate themselves on a comprehensive scale of either no risk, low, medium risk, or a high risk based on that risk analysis. This information is then fed into the tool to calculate audit time. Audit time can be broken down into 2 clear aspects, one being on-site audit time, the other being off-site. Recognize that our standard focuses on audit duration. Audit duration is defined as that time between the opening meeting and the closing meeting of the audit. Anything outside of that, report writing, planning, OCAP, is also considered off-site activity, but it's part of audit time, not part of audit duration. We're using the mandatory document 5 for the baseline. We're going to use that for planning, auditing, and report writing. Again, I said it before, the clients are going to need to step up and participate in this process. And the 9104-1 standard clearly defines that. They must develop and report to the certification body QMS performance and change data. That data should be submitted within 90 days of the audit. The CB process needs to include a review of the submitted data prior to starting the audit and by the assigned lead auditor, data review to be documented. So at the end of the day, we want to do more than just get this information and calculate audit duration with it. It needs to be validated. And the requirement is the lead auditor needs to validate that data during the audit. Client must also identify supporting IAQG standards that have been implemented in their system. Why, yes? Well, because ultimately, if those processes have been embedded within their QMS, there could be additional need for audit duration to ensure the process is compliant. IAQG standards matrix is going to give us that visibility on use of our IAQG standards. The certification program risk analysis that Daryl's going to go over with you, recognize this data needs to be defined by the client. The key performance metrics we need to evaluate is on-time delivery, conformity of delivered product or service. An example of that is item escape rate, or as we know it, number of pieces received versus number of pieces rejected, for example. Myriad of other metrics that may be available, but the key is the organization needs to define these metrics and whether or not they're meeting or exceeding expectations. Also need to look at customer satisfaction. And in addition, we're going to start using the process effectiveness assessment report data, or the PAIR data, to also feed the OCAP tool by looking at the lowest scored PAIR in the previous audit. The risk analysis will have an output of either low, medium, or high. As you can tell, if you're a low risk, then there's a reduction in audit duration up to 10%. Medium, no change in audit duration. However, if you're identified as a high risk organization, there's a requirement to increase audit duration up to 10%. A new concept we're introducing in this version of the 9104-1 that replaces the IFMD3 process is called Performance-Based Surveillance Recertification Process, or PBSRP. It's an optional process. It's not mandatory. It's up to the organization to work with their CV to say, hey, we believe we're qualified. We have the data to support that, because there is a high hurdle for entry and remaining in the program. So it's not one and done. You have to continue to monitor and manage your QMS to ensure you continue to meet this criteria to stay in the program. Entry will be allowed only after one certification cycle, so it's not an option for new clients. However, those that have a mature system, after the first certification cycle, it is an option. They must have a robust internal audit program with auditors that have the same training as our aviation, space, and defense lead auditors. Low or no complaints to the QMS, and they must continue to meet their key performance indicators. Also, audits should have good results, no major NCRs against certain aspects of the QMS. And the methodology initial certification is not eligible. So ultimately, you get in the program, and 1/3 of the sites for each surveillance and the central function will be used during the auditing activity. Okay. Again, the central function can be a virtual site. Okay. Program adjustments when criteria is not continually met. So if the organization fails to meet the thresholds for PBSRP after they initiate the program, then they can take and have an adjustment to the plan. So that would ensure that the risks are mitigated by additional auditing, but ultimately you have to evaluate the QMS health annually. Okay. There is a very detailed appendix in the standard that covers PBSRP. It's basically starting from the qualification requirements. That's table D1. As you can tell, it begins by restating what I've already said, completion of one cycle. OCAP risk needs to be lower minimum. The internal audit program, internal auditor competencies. As you can tell, all this criteria must be met to be qualified for PBSRP. In addition, the table D2 talks about adjustments and what could trigger an additional adjustment to the program. So I'm not just doing 1/3 of the sites. I could add sites. I could move audit duration around, whatever I needs to address the certificate issue that's identified in table D2 and the associated activities. So again, very detailed information that not only supports initial qualification, but it also supports ongoing maintenance as such. I mentioned before a lot of graphics in these standards, so you'll see a very top level, I use the term executive level briefing on the ICOP process. One slide that depicts the scheme from the basically request for certification all through the various support processes, and it includes our OASIS database, which houses all of our certification results data. There's also information on the OASIS feedback process that we have. So if you need additional guidance for your clients or yourself, please go to that Appendix C, if you will, and you'll see an extensive amount of information about OASIS feedback, as well as there's a very detailed PBSRP model. So with that, that kind of gives you a really good comprehensive initial review of the changes. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Daryl Taylor, who's going to step us through a live demonstration of the new and improved OCAP tool. So please, Daryl, take it away.
So if you've had the pleasure of working with the current version, the version that is out on the IAQG website, this is a very different look. The IAQG has gone off and tapped some people to redo this in a what is really considered a more friendly format. So what you're looking at here, right on the front page, is the specification of standards. Tim already alluded to this. This is a section where the client needs to go in here and tell us what standards they're using. The point is, one, we want to know in the industry what standards have we been spending our time on writing, and are they being used? And two, if they're not being used, what are they using? The other thing is this helps an auditor prepare for the audit. So for example, 13100 is coming out. That is a combination of 9145 and 9100. It's good to know as an auditor that both of these are being contractually required and gives them audit paths to pursue. So let's take the first one here. This is the first article inspection requirement, 9102. And in here, this is a drop down. And if I say yes, this is one that's been contractually flowed to me. I'm answering this question here. Contractually flowed down and I am compliant. Or I'm voluntarily compliant, or I'm voluntarily partially compliant, or do I use another type of standard? So this information will go in here. You don't have to fill out the whole thing. The minute you move on from this screen, you can see up here, this is our timeline across the top here. We have the standards, which will move us to the audit program. And then down at the bottom, we're going to have a spot in here for you to add of the standards. And I mentioned 13100 would be a perfect one to add in down here if you have to comply with that. But again, this helps the auditor prepare for their audit and helps give them some direction on where the company is coming or the client is coming from and where they're getting their requirements. This is going to be required to be maintained. We're going to look at it in every audit. And it, again, will help them prepare for the audit. The next tab is audit program. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start with a fictional. We'll call this XYZ company. And it can be anywhere. The OIN number is going to come out of OASIS. Down here, there's a little bit of direction, and you'll find throughout the tool, we've popped in these little pop-ups that might help you understand what's in here, but there's a little bit of direction on whether you're picking a multi-site or a single site. For the first go around here, I'm going to do a single site. I will come back and do a multi-site in a minute. And this is where you pick the type of audit you're going to do. Is this an initial? Is it a recertification, or is it a surveillance audit? I'll pick recertification for this demo. For our first go around, I'm not going to pick PBSRP. This is a rule changer. So, and you can find when we work across here, I can't get into this tab, PBSRP, if I say no here. And then some information, who created it, the date they created it. And this information here is really for the certification body. It's anything they want to put in here. Maybe they're using some sort of tracking system, but it's a free field. Anything that would help them identify this particular tool to the work that they're doing. whatever is helpful for them. But it's a free field, and you can enter anything you want in here. So once I have this initial information together, the first thing I want to do is save it, and then I'm going to move into my risk analysis. There will be a risk analysis for every organization at the highest level. Doesn't matter whether you're a multi-site. I'm going to get into site level calculations here in a minute, but it doesn't matter. You have to do the organization risk assessment for every company, whether a single site or a multi-site. There is some direction here below, but I would also encourage you to look at the standard. They've defined the standard is very clear in each one of these. Down below, you see here, this is a modified table from MD5. We modified it for the aerospace industry. In complexity, you come down here and you determine how complex your organization is. This is really done by the certification body in cooperation with the client. But you're going to come in here and you're going to just scroll down so you can see it. You come down here and say, well, is this a small, simple site? Is it small, complex? Is it large, simple, or large, complex? For this exercise, I'm going to go with medium. Now you can think, if you look at this, is probably about a 50% probability that you're going to end up being medium in this category anyway. So I'm going to pick medium. The internal audit program in the standard table 5 will give you the definition of how to define whether they have a high, low, or medium internal audit program. The writing team recognized that this is a control point, and if the control point is very strong, it's going to give us a lot more confidence about what we're going to find out when we audit the client. So there are details in there. If you're operating much like a certification body, you're probably low. You're going to be, your risk factor is low. There are some details in here, as I mentioned earlier. So an average program, you have limited resources for the audit program. The internal audit program is an annual event. The full QMS is covered annually. So if you run into some of these sites where they don't do a full QMS every year, well, they fall into this high category. But that's how you read that line here. So let me pick, I'm going to go with medium for this. On-time delivery. Now, these next 3 categories are defined by the organization that's being audited. So they're going to tell you, how do they measure on-time delivery? The challenge for an auditor is to make sure that is supportable. Is it justified? Can I go in there and say, if they tell me I have an 80% on-time delivery, and I'm meeting it, and then you go and you look at all the customer complaints and you look at the customer requirements and they're sitting there at 95%, then you certainly would be challenging their output here. But initially, it comes from the organization and we agree on what that is. So they define what it is. And the next thing is they define, and there's some direction here, but they define what conformity of delivered product or service is. Whatever their definition, based on their product, based on their sector or their industry, they're going to define that. And then again, the auditor needs to justify that. Let's just say for now, they're high. Customer satisfaction. Again, the organization defines this. They may be getting things like report cards. They may be getting customer complaints. They may be getting, if we're talking like DCMA, might be issuing level 2 cars and issues like that. So whatever their method is to calculate that, then you come to some agreement on how they're performing. Are they meeting their expectations of their customer? Are they exceeding them, or are they below expectations, putting them in a high risk category? Tim already talked briefly about this, but we also recognize when you look at a group of pairs coming from a site, the weakest link is the poorest scoring pair. And that will be carried into the following audit. So if I have a major in a pair and I might be sitting down with a 1 or a 2 from that customer, from that pair from a previous audit, then you would give them a high risk rating here. This all gets totaled out, and you can see here this results in a medium risk for the organization. and this information will now carry forward to the next section. As I mentioned, if I go to PBSRP, there are a number of things like this that'll pop out throughout the process. Like if you didn't finish a page or something like that, it'll come up and tell you we're missing information. What this says is PBSRP needs to be set to yes in the process menu. Otherwise, it doesn't apply right now. So I'm going to jump over that one and say, yep, you're right. I said no. I'm going to go to the site. You can see the information that I captured earlier has been transferred into this document. So we got the XYZ Corporation there anywhere, single site, we're doing recertification. That information is all carried forward. That medium has been carried forward from the risk analysis. And now the next thing I'm going to do, it's a single site, but I'm going to add a site. It is a central function. It's a single site, so it automatically becomes a central function. And in this page, we have the opportunity to do our reductions and our additions. But you can see here the OIN numbers calculated. Again, what is this is important, the primary certification type. So for example, we have integrated management systems in here. I might have 1,000 people working with 9100 and you might have 50 working with 9110. That would be treated separately, but I get a focus on my primary one. I might have a distribution center that's primarily 9120, but they have a small section that does 9100 work, and they might have an integrated management system. For our single site, going back to our example, I'm going to put 500 people in here. And you can see it starts with telling us this is the range. This comes right out of the table. This comes right out of 9104. It says for 500 people for a recertification audit, which is up here, it's 9.5 days. But we have an opportunity to do some reductions as well. So let's just say in my example, this is a build to print operation. So when you come in here, do they manage the QMS? Yes, it's a single site. So I would almost guess every single site is not going to check this off. They're not going to have the ability to check it off. But when you get into a multi-site, there are opportunities to check this off and take a reduction because they don't manage it there. I'm going to check this off. This is design and development because what I said was they are a build to print. So I'm going to say they're going to get that 20% reduction. If you recall the old version of 9104-1, they had a two separate tables. We've now combined them. It was pretty much the option in the middle column was without design, and that's exactly the same numbers are showing up in here. But we also allow other things. In theory, you could have a company that is strictly a design house. Well, today you can go in here and you can take a reduction because they don't do manufacturing. And when we get into the multi-site, this becomes more important because things like purchasing may all be done in one site and not done in another site. So you can take a reduction for that. And these are things that were not allowed in the original version, but will be allowed moving forward. So in their reduction column here, you can see a couple things. There's no change. What we said about the risk adjustment, if they're medium, there's no change. You know, if you're low, you get a 10% reduction. If you're high, you get an automatic 10% increase. So there was no change here. And they're not PBSRPs, so they're not going to take advantage of that. Once we're completed reductions, we get into additions. So if you're adding people because you need translators, you can put that information here. Let's just say you're following up on corrective actions from a previous audit and doing a validation. You may need to add time for that. Well, and so let's pick that one. And you can see over here, this is a free field because you can go in here and say, I'm going to add a day to follow up on non-conformances. From a previous audit or a customer audit. And then down here below, you're going to put down some information. I'm going to follow up on previous corrective actions. And so there are reasons for this, and there are other reasons. You may have non-AQMS audit duration addition. You might be incorporating a and integrating a system between like 14,000, which is not AQMS. So you may want to add that time in here if you want to show it in this tool, and any other reason that you find a reason to increase time. You're going to incorporate that into this block right here and justify how you did that increase. For this exercise, I'm not going to go through an integrated QMS standard, but if you did, I'll just show you exactly how that works. You'd put in a 9110, for example, and let's just say we had 50 people in that function. You can see it goes to the max. It assumes full integration. The feedback we had during this whole creation over the last 3 or 4 years was that most CVs came back to us and said that when they have an AQMS integrated system, they were fully integrated. So this assumes that if it's not fully integrated, then you go back up here into additions and go, you're going to add time, you're going to add additional time, and you're going to add that time because it's not a fully integrated system. So you can see here, I took that integrated management system approach out, but you can see in our audit duration, this is the time from opening to closing the closing meeting. The audit duration is 8.5. This number here is rounded up to the highest half day. Down below here, it automatically will add 20% for additional audit time. This is to do the OCAP tool. This is to do the report writing, but there's a 20% bump of audit duration when this calculation is completed. That ends up being 10.2. If you want to add additional time, you have that option. You click this box and you can add additional time in here for audit time, not audit duration, but you have several opportunities to add time. This last little box here is really to address some anomalies that you might see in your approach. Let me just give you one example. Let's just say we have a site 3 doors down from their site. They have a warehouse that supports the main site, and you might argue this is a single site. They just happen to have a warehouse that happens to be three doors down. It doesn't make sense to call that a multi-site because of the way they operate. So you would put that in here. You'd add that information in stating that there's a warehouse on the other side of town or across the street, which is a part of the single site. But this is anything that you need to do to justify how you selected that as a single site and how you incorporated that building into this would be covered here. Any anomaly that you need to justify. Next, I'm going to save the changes. And you can see I've got a quick summary of what this is going. I have my central site. It's this corporation. It's medium risk. My number of employees calculated out to 9.5. We took a reduction of 1.9. We added a day to follow up on corrective actions. They ended up that being for audit time a 10.2 calculation here. And we've moved to the last tab, which is the summary. This will put everything on one line. Not that beneficial for a single site, but definitely when we get into a multi-site, you can do a lot of comparisons in here of each one and how it matches up and get your total. But in here, you also have the ability to go off and create PDF files if you want to attach it to Oasis or get a printout of it for your files. They're covered up here. So that covers a single site. Let me go back to the beginning. And I'm going to change this. I'm going to turn this into a multi-site. So I'm going to go to the audit program, same company, but I'm going to come in here and again, follow the directions. There's the definition of a multi-site. Notice the emphasis on a central function. It has to have, to be a multi-site, you have to have a central function at which certain processes, activities are planned and controlled. I'm going to change this to multi-site. Let me stick with my recertification theme here, and the rest stays the same. I go to my risk analysis. That does not change. That's because I have to have an organizational level calculation. So I have to look at the entire organization, regardless of how many sites they have. And I have to determine what the risk is for that organization. When I come over here to sites, a couple things have changed here. So down here, you have an option here, which is risk calculation type. Right now, it has to be organization because we are not PBSRP. If you are PBSRP, this gives you an option between doing the organization calculation and in addition to that, also doing a site level calculation. And the point is, if you're doing PBSRP and you have a site that may be running high risk compared and being balanced off by a low risk, you may want to shift some time around to compensate for that. And I'll show you that opportunity here in a minute. So we have our central function. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change this a little because the central function should not be sitting up around 500 people. Most central functions are really the upper level management team that's managing it. You might have maybe an audit team that reports to that, but this number really should be more like somewhere around 50, 25 to 100 perhaps. But that central function is not going to be an entire site. It's not about the site. It's about the group of people that manage this process. So I'm going to drop this one down to 50. Because they manage everything. In my multi-site, we're going to do everything. They have the ability to do, they're doing design activity, they're doing purchasing, they're doing manufacturing, so I'm not going to take any reductions for that. And I'm all set with this one. I'm going to save that change. I'm going to add 2 more sites. So I'm going to add a site. I made a mistake here. Back here. This did not take hold. I probably didn't save it correctly, so okay. And I've corrected that. And it's kind of a good example, even though I made a mistake. It's a good example of how this tool corrects itself to make sure you've got the right thing flowing through the entire process all the way to the end. So now I need to add a site. Let me add a site this time. So this is going to be site number 1. That also can be anywhere. It's not going to be my central function. I already defined my central function. It may have a separate OIN number. This is maybe another opportunity. You might have a 9110 facility and a 9100 facility. But for this, I'm going to stick with 9100. And for this site, I'm going to do 250 people. When I come down to reductions, let me rename this a little. I'm going to call this Site 1 Engineering. So in my example, they do not manage the QMS. That is done by the central function. They do design and develop, but they're not buying and they're not manufacturing product there. It's the design house, so the design branch of this particular multi-site, and these functions are done in another building or in another site. Come down here, you can do the same thing with additions. I will leave that alone, and we'll come to the end of this, and I will save those changes. Let me add another site. This one is going to be site 2. And this is for both purchasing and manufacturing. Again, it's not the central function. It may have its own OIN number. Primary certification is going to be 9100. This one I'm going to make 1500 people. You can see it gave us the range for 1,500 people, kind of a heads up to the auditor that they're sitting right on the edge. It's kind of something you may want to look at. They don't manage the QMS, but they do purchasing and they do control of production. The other thing you'll notice here, this is at 35% reduction. Let's just say hypothetically that they were PBSRP. If they were, they would get another 33%. This will truncate a reduction at 50%. You cannot go below 50% or you would be in violation to MD5, and we are not going to violate MD5. So I'll go down here and save this change. And you can see we have our 3 sites, and you can keep going. We have 3 sites in a central function, part of that number with the total audit duration. So let's summarize this. So this is looking at time reallocation. So now that I have this all set up, I might come in here and say, okay, I'm doing a full recertification audit. Let me just, I may look at the history and go, I've got 5 days I'm spending in engineering and maybe it doesn't warrant that much. But in here, this one column right here, margin, this tells you how much wiggle room you have in this process. You might look at this and go, I'm going to take 1 day away from here, and this is allowed per the standard. And if you notice here, this fails because I still have to add it in. I have to do the total number of time. So I have to do, if I do a subtraction here, I need to add a day somewhere else. And in this simple example, I'm going to add another day into my purchasing and manufacturing. So you can see how this broke down. I'm going to spend 1.5 with my central function, 4.8 with my design house, 10.8 with my manufacturing and purchasing. And this passes, so I did this correctly. And I can summarize the whole thing. So in here, you can see here the summary. Central function, 50 people. This is the audit time. 250 people audit time, and 1,500 people is this audit time for this particular audit. Let me go back and give you one quick example on PBSRP. I know initially we're not going to see a lot of PBSRP activity, but I do think it may take hold, and we're going to see more and more companies taking advantage of it. So it's worth doing that. Quick heads up, if I start playing around with this column or this column, the answer is, any supplier site calculation entered will be lost by changing to PBSRP. Do I want to continue? Yes. This doesn't change. The risk analysis, it's going to continue regardless. I now have PBSRP in here. And this block now opened up because I said yes, otherwise this block wouldn't open up. But you have to record every year that you've gone back and either initially agreed that they were candidates for PBSRP, or you have to make sure they have maintained their PBSRP status. And this is one way of documenting that. So early on in the plan, you're going to be able to come in and double check and make sure everything that's required is still in play. And they would still pass. Technically, if they don't pass, there is direction in the, if they don't pass, this is a problem. This will impact their calculation. We're going to assume they pass, but there are directions in the standard of what you are supposed to do if they don't pass. One is you take them out of the PBSRP system, but so we're going to assume they pass. We're going to go back to our sites. If you notice in here, some of the, we don't have any time anymore. So I've got to come back in here and redo this. So I'm going to go look at that central function. It's, they do everything, so I'm not going to touch any of that. But notice here that they've got a negative 0.8 days for PBSRP for that calculation. And I will leave the rest of this alone. I'm going to go to the next site. And what we said was they were design only. So I'm going to take exceptions here, here, and here. You can see they don't manage the QMS. They don't do any purchasing. They don't do any manufacturing. That ends up being a 78% reduction overall. That is not allowed. So the max is 50, but it gives you a high heads up that that's what happened here. And they get 4 days taken off the original 8 for that particular size site. Save these changes. Go wrap this up with this site here. So we said they were going, they take a reduction for the first 2. And because they're PBSRP, they get down to that 50% mark, they can't go any further. And we save that change. And through this process, you can see PBSRP was taken into consideration. It does have a significant impact on the organization. I would look at something like this and say, there's not a lot of margin here. I'm pretty much down to my 50% mark. I'm a little bit over in the central function, a little bit over on purchasing. I would leave this alone because I am so close to the margins that I wouldn't touch this at all. And a quick summary of audit time is right here of my 3 functions. I can print this out, create a PDF, and attach that to any document. So that's a quick summary. We've gone through a single site. We've done a multi-site. We also looked at a multi-site that's PBSRP. We've looked at the new tool. This particular tool is a pilot. It is being cleaned up and should be available shortly for you to move to. I think you'll find it a little bit more user-friendly than the last one, but will meet the definitions of the standard, being a very useful tool for us moving forward. And I will turn this back over to Tim.
Okay, so that takes us into the next phase of this process, or basically activity. I want to talk a little bit about transition. As you know, we are in the year of transition, I call it, and we're not only transitioning to the 9104-1 2022 standard, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're also updating all of our systems, including OASIS. So please refer often and frequently to our IAQG websites to see the latest information on the online aerospace supplier information system. Currently, we are still using the OASIS Next Generation. And for all things transition, there is a link on the login page, as you can tell here, that takes you to a landing page in the help guidance that clearly has the tools that certification bodies and stakeholders will utilize to transition, including a very comprehensive supplemental rule that includes all the guidelines, the requirements, instructions for certification bodies that are transitioning to the new criteria. There's also a top-level change presentation should you need to educate your internal sources. There's a frequently asked questions log on the 9104-1 standard. And as Daryl mentioned, we also will be releasing a new OCAP tool. The current version is at R10. So there's been quite a bit of work on this tool as we develop it through the lessons learned. And then there's a very top level ICOP scheme transition roadmap, which is on the next scheme. And basically our roadmap indicates that we are in current transition. We're focused on getting the sector management structures, the regional management structures transitioned. We have our accreditation bodies already transitioned. They transitioned at the end of last year. So now we begin the task of working directly with our certification body stakeholders to transition their systems and expand the scope of their accreditation. There has been a change in the transition timeline. That change was due to our dependencies on languages all over the world. When you have an international community, you operate in 6 different languages. So we have had our challenges with getting our standards transitioned and translated into the various languages such as French, German, Spanish, Japanese, for example. So we aligned our timeline to align with those standards being available and the training be available. So the criteria will be once the language that you operate in becomes available, the certification body will have 12 months from that date to transition. And then after their transition, they will begin working with their clients to utilize the new criteria that we've outlined in this presentation today. So again, just a bump in the road, if you will, but however, we want to make sure that we do have a comprehensive plan going forward with transition, which I know a lot of our target audience today are the lead auditors out there. And please recognize that there is a requirement in the supplemental rule that mandates auditor training. And it mandates that you successfully complete the training within 12 months of the training being released in your supporting language. So look for the English version coming out in first quarter 2023. And then soon after that, we'll start seeing versions available in the various IAQG sponsored languages. So in summary, as always, we thank you for your time that you spent with us today. We think this 9104-1 standard represents a significant change to the ICOP process. It's a step in the right direction. All changes are aligned with the revision objectives and are needed to improve, innovate, and add value and promote confidence in our scheme. To implement it effectively, we need your support to effectively implement these changes and ensure that we do have an ICOP process that is robust, recognized, and valued. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and have a great day.